Hello, everybody. This is John Ginoli from Pansy Division.
And I'm Chris Freeman from Pansy Division.
We are here to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the release of Pansy Division's first album, Undressed, which came out in February of 1993. So we have several guests that we've invited to chat with us who were involved with the band at that time. And so we want to share those conversations with you.
So here's our last guest, who is probably one of the most important people in our history, um, Larry Livermore.
All right. Well, we're here today with Larry Livermore, one of the founders of Lookout Records, to talk about Pansy Division's first album, Undressed, which came out in February of 1993, 30 years ago. Hello, Larry.
Hi, John. Hi, Chris. Great to be here.
So my first question was going to be, how did you find out about Pansy Division? But I also had a quick question because when John said the date of the release, we're not really sure what the actual date of the album's release was.
Well, you joined the club. I 93 sounds about right since we are celebrating the 30th anniversary. Um, but an exact date, I have no idea.
I could swear for years that even though I didn't know the exact date, that it came out in March of 93. And then I was on Discogs just last week, and I thought maybe Discogs will spit out the date, the actual date. And it didn't, but there's a promo copy of the album, like a white label without any album artwork, with a one sheet taped to it that says prospective release date, February 5th, 1993. So that is the best information I have.
Dates were sometimes pushed back. What you saw is actually a test pressing. As you know, we worked with Mordam Records with Ruth Schwartz, who's a brilliant woman who set up that whole company and made what we did possible. To her, there was a fixed date, and it always had to be a certain day of the week because that's how things work in the industry. And so at Ruth's direction, we were doing about 30 to 40 test pressings of every new album, and then she would send them out to all of the distributors and stores with a one sheet like you saw.
Well, and then also we had a show that same date at Bottom of the Hill. So it's possible we could have said that's our record release party.
So when did you first become aware of us?
Well, I was given some thought to this actually, and I kind of envisioned Pansy Division before it actually happened. That may sound weird.
No, me too. For years.
Yeah, no, I know. And we were kind of on converging paths without even knowing each other's existence. It was not so much like I was trying to be Svengali and say, oh, I should put like a gay punk band. It was more like, yeah, that would be a good thing that there should be something like that. And I don't know exactly where or when it will come from, but I should keep my eye out. And so somewhere along the line, while I was from time to time musing on this subject, I first heard some kind of buzz about this guy that was forming a band called Pansy Division. And not too much after that, the demo tape that you made by yourself came into my hands. This was before Chris was in the picture. I don't know who gave it to me. I don't think it was you because I had not met you in person yet.
Right.
And I saw a lot of potential in it. I said, well, this is basically what I've been thinking should happen. Probably needs like a little bit more, of a band feel rather than a guy with some session musicians. Then I found out that you were doing a show at the Commotion Collective. So I said right away, well, I'm going to go check this out. And in fact, you played that night with, I guess, I didn't know if you had a backing tape or not. As all I recall, it was you and a guitar amp. It seems to me that you did, at least for some of the songs, use the backing tape because it was kind of like a band, only it was one guy.
Right. That didn't last long, but that's very possible.
I'm looking at the date, and it's saying October 12th of 1991 was a show at Club Commotion with go-go dancers.
Now, you may or may not remember this, but I came up to you right after you finished and I said, get a bass player and a drummer and you got a record deal.
I
And
don't remember that. I do
well,
not
I do.
remember
And,
that.
and I was talking about like serious business. So I tend to remember these things. That's where our recollections seem to maybe be a little bit different because I've read, might be in your book or in an interview where you talk about like scouting out different record companies and trying to get their attention and stuff. When in fact, with Lookout, there was no scouting out or trying necessary. I mean, you had a deal from the minute you started, whether you knew it
I
or not.
The thing is, did you identify yourself as being from Lookout
Pretty
when
good. I generally did. Otherwise, people didn't want to talk to me.
you know what? Let me tell you something. My insecurity probably did not believe you. Like I probably thought, we don't even have a band. He's talking about wanting to put a record out. That's ridiculous. That probably would have been my interior thought from
Yes, that's
talking to
very
you.
possible. I would have been the same if somebody came up and offered to put my record out.
If you had told me that you were on Lookout and you were interested in putting a record out, I would have remembered that because I already knew that Lookout was a good label.
I
So,
didn't say I was interested. I said you got a deal.
well, because as things were going on, I did not have in the back of my mind, oh, Lookout's going to put it out. I thought Lookout's a label that we might want to have put it out, but
Yeah,
there were two other labels that I was
because you
seriously
worry a
considering.
lot. It's because you worry a lot, John, and also
Oh, it's
because
true. It's true.
and also because you probably thought, well, maybe their Lookout's okay, but maybe there's a better label.
You were working for a record distributor, so you were the one who told me about Green Day's sales, John.
Yes.
You were the one when we were looking, you were like, oh, Lookout would be good. Look at this band called Green Day that's actually doing quite well on this, and it's a local
Yeah, by
label. I know that Jello must have had the tape around the same time because when was the No on Nine thing?
I think it was like May of 92.
Because he called John and left a voicemail saying, John, I'm up in Portland for the No on Nine benefit, and I just talked to the guys in Nirvana, and they said it would be great to go ahead and put out the Smells Like Queer Spirit. So he was like, okay, so let's go. So he must have thought he had a chance somehow.
I
Um,
mean,
I,
my memory is that we were looking at AT or Lookout, but my friend Glenn, who ran Bar None Records in Hoboken, he got interested too, though he hadn't been initially. So it seemed like it was either going to be AT or Lookout, and then Bar None got involved, but then I realized that Lookout or AT would be better for us.
Well, that was at a kind of a crucial time. A transformation was taking place up until about 91 or so. AT had been the unquestioned big punk label of the Bay Area, and we
Right.
were in the course of passing them up around that
exactly.
time.
and
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 then,
that's exactly what John was noticing by working at the record distributor that
Yeah,
where he was
rough
at. He
trade.
was he was seeing that ratio. He's like, I think we should go on the elevator that's going up.
so it was probably at the time probably the best plan was Lookout.
Oh yeah.
Unfortunately, later developments, but
Well,
We,
that's for another episode a couple of years from now.
yeah,
when I picked bands for Lookout, I tended to do it pretty quickly and impulsively, including both Green Day and Operation Ivy. It took me about 30 seconds in the case of both of those guys. And my take on you and your songs was right away, yep, this is Lookout material. I never really swerved from the idea from the time that I saw John at Commotion, and I guess you tell me October 6, 91.
Yep.
From that point, it was my assumption that Pansy Division were going to be on Lookout, and the only question was how soon the band would be together and ready to record.
I joined the band weeks after that show. In October, I was on a 5-week trip in Switzerland, and I had the cassette with me, and that's where I first listened to it. So when I got home, I'm like, I'm doing this, yes.
And
And
I heard about you joining almost as soon as you did. I don't
yeah,
know if from John or somebody else, but I knew about it very immediately afterwards, and I said, "Oh, good, we're making progress. Probably this is
yeah.
going to happen soon."
But I don't recall ever hearing that it was anything that was a done deal. So I'm so glad that you're saying this because
yeah.
It's very interesting because, John was doing all of everything. I mean, at this point, I was just trying to catch up, putting my trailer on his pickup.
I think that if anything slowed it down, it was the drummer issue.
Correct.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I remember drumming being an issue for a while, actually until Luis showed up, which was not till '96, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the end of
Uh,
'96.
But, that is the story that got us on to Lookout. And then once we got on to Lookout, we did our first album on our own and delivered it to you. And then we, prepared the artwork. So I wanted to hear about your reaction to hearing the album and seeing the cover that we wanted to go with it.
refresh my memory. Which cover are we looking at? Is this the naked one?
Yes, the naked one.
Yeah. Um, well, first off, I want to.
He wants to see it again.
Yeah, no, I remember that, and I said, well, this is what we wanted. It may be a bit awkward, but we'll get through it. Yeah, I recall seeing the cover art and saying, "Oh, this is going to be fun." And I can't remember if we had to change printers for it or not. I kind of suspect we did.
Yes, I was told that whoever did the cassettes balked at doing the cover. But
yeah, the cassette people were born again Christians, and they just refuse. And I think I'm mixing this up with another release. There was one time we had one where the company that printed the labels that went on the vinyl that wouldn't print it, but I think that was a different form of obscenity that they were upset about, or maybe it was something against God.
There were so many to choose from over the years.
I think, and I won't swear to this, but I think because the regular printer wouldn't do your cover, that we went to a new one in Montreal, and they did such a good job on it that I think we kept working with them from then on. One thing I would want to touch on is that Pansy Division, and especially John personally, were a bit different from most of the bands we worked with in those days. I'm not saying it's a bad or a good thing. In some ways, it was a good thing because we were learning as we went along. But most of the bands had little or no experience in the industry and counted on us to pretty much do everything for them. They might give us some pieces of art and we'd have to put it together into a cover, or they might they would send us like scraps of this or that, and somehow we would have to put it all together. With John, it was almost too much in the other direction. It was like he did everything, and we're like, well, what are we supposed to do?
Release it, sell it.
It was kind of like John treated us like idiots, which we were, but but
well, weren't we the first to ask for a something typed up like a contract of something or something? I think we were the first ones.
It's not necessarily. You might somewhere around that time. No, actually, you may have been. The Green Day, when they started talking to Warner Brothers, we didn't have any contract with them, so I asked them to sign a simple contract for the first two records. And at that point, we started doing the same deal with most other bands. But some bands actually refused. They just didn't want any contract. And we were kind of the same way at first. But Kevin Army, do you know Kevin Army, the producer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were working with him a lot, and he had a lot of experience in the record industry before we got involved with him. And he said, look, a contract is not something to be afraid of. It doesn't mean you're selling out or commercial. It's just both parties writing down in language that they can see right in front of their faces what they expect of the other. And it can save a lot of trouble and heartbreak later on if you think, oh, well, I didn't know you were going to keep putting out the record, or I didn't know you wanted us to pay us for every record, or, these kind of things. Often completely innocent misunderstandings. But as I recall with the contract, it was a little bit more formal and more, industry standard than we were used to dealing with. And it kind of made it feel like, oh, gee, I don't know if these guys trust us. And, on the other hand, why should they? Because just because a label is independent or punk does not mean that they're strictly honest. Plenty of crooks
Right.
operating both DIY and
So that
so
was
it,
the
it,
idea.
it,
Yeah.
it felt a little bit awkward, but at the same time,
It was a one-page contract.
yeah, no, I know, but it was, like I say, a little bit slicker than we were. I mean, eventually our standard contract grew to 7 pages and a lawyer had written it, but that was later on. Um, and so in a way, you were helping us grow into being more of an adult record label as opposed to a crazy kid label. Um, and that would go.
Adult, like adult books, and no. All
Yeah,
right.
no, I don't think so. Grown up.
Well, maybe with our album cover,
Well,
yes,
that's what I was going to say.
which many teenagers bought.
You
And
can
But
get
it
this
was
at any adult bookstore.
it was it was like with a lot of bands, it was a process of getting used to the individual personality of the bands. Some bands, they didn't want to really engage much at all. They just wanted to put out a record and collect their checks. And other bands wanted to be deeply involved at every level. Like Larry, what do you think of the third line of the second song on the new album? And do you think we should change it? You know, that kind of. And each band was different. And some of the bands were extremely young, and the whole idea of even being on a record was totally strange to them. And other bands had been around a bit, and they knew more about it than we did. So we kind of grew up together.
well, you talk about how we were different from other bands on Lookout. I think one thing that stood out to me at the time was I was much older. So it seemed like a lot of the bands that I knew of that were on Lookout were in their early 20s. And when
That was
I
true.
was
Or
32, I was 32 when we
pretty ancient.
deal. Yeah. Ancient for the music biz.
Before I moved to San Francisco, up in Seattle, I was in a band that was being snipped out by the majors, and I was one of the main songwriters. And so they wanted to find out, like, okay, who's who in the band, who does what, kind of grooming us. And it came out that I was gay, and they said, well, we're never going to mention that, and you will never be asked to do interviews. And then along the way, we realized, oh, there's actually this kind of Logan's run in the music business that if you're over 30, you're never going to get signed in the music business. I learned that later that
Now the
that was actually
80-year-old
true.
Rolling Stones can make $50 million for a tour.
But they're not getting signed at age 80.
Right.
That's the
So,
thing.
and
You get in, if you start earlier, you can get in before they shut the door.
and it's been confirmed to me to this day because a drummer in another project that I work on just turned 30, and he stopped getting any calls for any of the pop work that he was doing before. And he said, "Well, and the guy who did it, I won't mention his name, but because he's a big industry guy, said, no, if you're over 30, you're done."
I hadn't really thought about that aspect of being different because, of course, everybody noticed the gay part first.
Right.
The first punk scene in San Francisco in '77 was riddled with gay people. I mean, it was so much so that you didn't even think about it. There was nobody saying we're a queer band or we're a gay band or anything. And many of the bands were integrated. They had both gay and straight. And that in turn led to the realization that nobody called themselves punk then either.
Mm-hmm.
They were called punk by outsiders often, or they said this is weird new scene going on down to the Mabaway in San Francisco, and all manner of genders and hairstyles and whatever is there, and it looks somewhat like the English punk, but in those days, nobody seemed to feel the need to identify themselves. In fact, they'd say, "Oh, well, it's San Francisco. Of course, there's going to be gay people everywhere, doing everything." And then I thought, well, but the next wave of punk, which you guys entered into, the Gilman, the post '87 stuff. Ever since then, everybody has been, I'm punk, I'm trans punk, I'm queer punk, I'm gutter punk, whatever. It's all about identity. And ironically, when that started happening, like the gay part almost got erased. If there were that many gay people involved, they weren't visible. And the handful that were started feeling a need to like Tom, I don't know if you guys know Tom Jennings from Homocore,
Yeah.
right? he was one of the first at Gilman to start saying, well, gee, we got to have some representation and, identify the gay punks and so on. And so I was just really curious about why the OG punks and gay punks we're just doing our thing. But in modern times, it was almost necessary for you guys to declare yourself as a gay punk band, breaking the mold, bringing something new to the punk scene.
I have talked to people from that era about this very thing. One of the people I talked to is Robert Lopez from the Zeros, otherwise known as Elvis, the Mexican Elvis.
I saw Chris play with him one time. Very entertaining.
Yeah. And, I said, because, I remember having a pretty negative view of the LA punk scene because it just seemed obnoxious and straight. And I always loved X and I loved the Go-Go's. But, beyond that, it just seemed like there was a lot of obnoxiousness that seemed like the kind of scene where you really, like it was too tough. There was like too much front that you had to put up. And being gay was to make yourself vulnerable. So I think that's more of what it's about. Because
LA is all about front. So that's the distinguishing characteristic of LA. You're right. There was an LA thing that it was all about image. And, even Darby himself was not going to come right out and say that he was gay. San Francisco was very different from the LA punk scene, always. And they kind of looked at each other kind of at a distance. But San Francisco was never so much about getting signed and being in the industry, and always more about DIY, grassroots, local culture. So your friend Robert may well.
Well, what he said to me was, he said it just didn't come up. Like it wasn't the thing that they wanted to emphasize, but at the same time they weren't hiding, but they weren't talking about it either. And the fact that they weren't talking about it meant that if you weren't there, you would never know. So if you're there hanging out in this little scene, and it was a little scene, then you've got, it's an insider thing. Whereas somebody looking at that from the outside, you see a band like Fear who, come off as pretty homophobic, or somebody like the Angry Samoans. So I would think, God, these damn LA bands, and I wasn't sure what X meant by the song Los Angeles, because I couldn't.
I can't listen to that song anymore, not just for the faggot part, but for the whole racist part and everything. But
the thing is that they're talking about a person. They're not. They're reflecting their story. They're talking about the kind of person who comes to Los Angeles from somewhere else.
Almost everybody came to Los Angeles from somewhere else.
That's true.
They were reflecting how the punks talked.
Yeah.
I mean, the quote was, it hit hard, but that was how people talked. Even it could have well been a black person or a homosexual person or a Jewish person that was saying that line, and it would still say that I'm sick of all those people. And
yeah.
That was LA. San Francisco was very different, and it was not exhibitionistic like, hey, I'm gay, but it was also not at all unspoken. There was all this kind of crossover, which did not happen anymore. There, at some point, this is probably why I started thinking we need a gay punk band, because by that time, the gay scene had gone in one direction, the punk scene in another direction, and they barely even acknowledged each other's existence.
So the reason that it seemed really important for me to do this was because, think of the artistic ferment of that early punk period in LA and SF. You could do anything. You could express yourself in any way, but nobody expressed themselves in that certain way. And so for all of this freedom of expression, it's interesting that no one chose to be out in a way that was visible to anybody, outside a small radius of where they lived. And that was partly why Pansy Division exists, was that I kept waiting to hear something and it just never came along. And I thought, how can this be? How can this subject be so taboo that all these creative people who just sing about all this crazy stuff, they're not going to sing about being gay. They're not going to sing about being out. So I thought, I guess it's going to have to be me, but I'm in the right place to do it.
Well, isn't it interesting? Because Larry, you just pointed out the exact nexus of what you're talking about. The punk scene and the gay scene diverged, and John was saying, I can't now reconcile. Here I am in San Francisco. I can't reconcile being a musician and liking what I like and being in the gay world. I can't, there's no way to do it. So you know exactly where John ended up seeing that and going like, this is exactly where I've got to go.
However, if John had come to San Francisco 10 or 12 years earlier and got involved in the first punk scene, he would have probably seen it very differently, because certainly people were being ostentatiously gay at the clubs and at the shows and in the bands. They would often wear extremely flamboyant clothes. And yet there was, at that time, there was no inkling that this music or this culture was going to reach out across the country or the world, because it was a very specifically San Francisco thing. And it's almost hard to imagine, especially for younger people, how different it was, even in liberated San Francisco, how different it was to be gay. You go 10 miles outside the city and it was like another world. Even in the places where gayness was tolerated or somewhat accepted, it was still not something that you flaunted away from your own little neighborhood and network. Pretty much anywhere in the heart of San Francisco, you could wear anything and say anything and do anything, but that was about it. And I don't like these bands. I don't think any of them expected for people in Peoria to be listening to them. And in fact, it would be many years before anybody did. So that perspective, that's I think.
Except me.
Pardon?
Peoria, since I'm from Peoria.
I do know that, John.
I was alone. I knew two other people who listened to punk rock. Yes.
But an interesting parallel thing was happening during the time, when the original punk scene crashed and burned pretty quickly and turned, like from drugs and overexposure and for whatever reason, like 77 to 79, and that was kind of it. There was all sorts of stuff that lingered on through the 80s, like grindcore and crustcore and all. Most of that was like crossover with metal and very macho and definitely not gay friendly. And simultaneously, the gay identity movement was gathering steam and gay became kind of a trope in its. And there was a whole, just like there was a certain form. Original punks and at the Mad Boy in 77, you could wear almost anything. The more crazy or weird, the better, just like the early Gilman. Whereas after a couple of years, there was a certain costume you had to wear to be officially punk. And pretty soon, there was also a certain costume you had to wear to be officially gay. And it was a very different costume. You had to
So let me stop you here. So one of the things that is interesting is that it occurred to me in forming this gay band that the way that I dress is not very typically gay. Okay. I don't tend to be flamboyant or outrageous looking. I wanted our content to be flamboyant and outrageous looking, but I thought we would be more effective by not being this sort of gay cartoon where you could say, oh, look at them. They're just so flamboyantly gay. And I love that. But at the same time, I thought, I want to be the person that I am. Chris is much more of a dressing up kind of person than I am. I am not.
James Bondage over there.
Well, there's that. But there are two things that happened. One, we went on tour outside of the Bay Area. And
Right.
we realized, oh, there's only three of us now. There's not seven of us. So
Oh, go-go dancers.
we've got to
Right.
be a lot bigger. So, and John was rooted at the mic, concentrating on getting those vocals and the words out there. So I'm going to mime them or do crazy stuff. The place where the dress showed up was, we had a song called Strip You Down. If you remember, John, and I would put that the first dress was just a like a white pantaloon kind of thing that I tucked under my shorts. And so the whole idea was, we're going to wear the t-shirt and the shorts and the Converse like all the other bands. And then when we hit Strip You Down, I'm going to pull that down and it's going to be a skirt. And so we were trying to blow up that whole image of having a punk band uniform.
Yeah.
So that's exactly where that came from.
So let's move on to the album and let's talk about
Yes.
the album.
Yes.
So Larry, you heard the album, you heard the songs. Tell me what you remember about the songs that are on Undressed.
Well, this is going to be a little bit frustrating, awkward. It kind of ties into what we were talking about before, because my ambition for the band, and that may sound arrogant because it's not my band, but
Oh no, that's
I,
valid.
I feel like the label's job is to help the band do its best and accomplish the most. And my vision or ambition for the band was, to be much more massive, to cross over into different areas. And I'm sure you guys have heard me pushing for you to do something like that. Whereas, of course, you guys have got your own vision of how the songs should sound and how they should be played. And, my reaction on hearing the songs for the first time was basically, well, this is going to be okay. This is going to, it's going to sell more than enough to pay its own way and get some attention. I don't think it's going to be as big as I wish it would be.
Yeah, I hear you. When we were talking about putting the album out, one of the things that you said was, you need to get a Marshall stack and play that. And I'm like, nope, I am not going to sound like all the other punk bands. I'm going to keep I'll use distortion, but I'm going to keep
all the other punk bands that are
Stratocaster.
hundreds of thousands of records. You don't want to be like them.
No.
Well, that was more of a type of suggestion than a specific one, if you know what I mean. It was like,
yeah,
I wanted a beefier sound. You don't necessarily have to have a Marshall stack to get it. There's lots of other amps and lots of other setups that could do it. But your sound was a little bit too gentle, especially for the subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It was kind of like, if you took out the lyrics, it's the kind of music that, an open-minded grandma might like. It was.
I mean, I always saw us as being somewhere between indie and punk. So we didn't go all the way in either direction.
It's a hard area to navigate, because it's very hard to sell indie music. There's a few bands that have a certain shtick or gimmick that really comes across, and a lot of them are basically resolutely anti-commercial, and they'll sell a couple thousand records. With punk, it's there's a similar conundrum in punk. I mean, some punk bands will go out of their way to be obnoxious and swear on every other line and be so almost unlistenable. But the punk bands that are just loud and aggressive, they've got a built-in market, and they're going to sell a lot of records, at least to that group.
Yeah.
You guys kind of fell between the cracks, between the two worlds.
I thought that made us more interesting for my purposes.
But interesting, yes, but that's kind of like a philosophical question. How interesting can you be if nobody is listening?
Well, correct. My goal was to split the difference, and I thought we did it pretty successfully.
You did a good job. We're not here to criticize you or to tell you to start all over and do it differently. It's a little bit of. I'm saying you did great. I could see you being a million selling band, but there's more money more problems too. So maybe that's not what you would have wanted. Maybe that would have torn the band apart. Maybe
Yeah.
that would put a lot of pressure on you to soften up your lyrics or change them or to be something different than who you were. As it was, I mean,
Yeah.
your biggest selling point apart from music was sincerity. People knew that you meant everything that you said and did,
Right.
uh, which was a refreshing change from a lot of the bands who, by the time you came along, there was already starting, thanks to Green Day and some of the others, there was always starting to be a formula of how you became a commercially successful punk
Yeah.
band. Prior to them, we had all kinds of bands, and nobody copying anybody else. They just did it their own way, and you were continuing to do that at a time when everybody else was trying to sound like Epitaph and Fat and Lookout.
So one of the things we had access to talking to Howie quite a bit when we were on the Green Day tour, and
Okay, so
Howie Klein,
people
you're talking
watching
about?
this aren't going to know who that is.
okay, so
Howie
How,
Klein was
Howie,
one of the first punk rock record labels in San Francisco, 415 Records. He became president of Reprise Records and had quite a successful career and retired. And now he's a radical leftist politician and blogger.
yeah. So when we were talking to him, we asked him, well, do you really think that a band like ours could be on a major label? And he said, I wouldn't do it. He said the platform you have is gold. You can say whatever you want. Your labels backed you with whatever you ever wanted to do. You could do whatever you want because on us, we wouldn't get you in any of the major chains because you're gay. So there's the whole Christianity thing. Then there'd be a big warning sticker on the record.
no
And
radio play.
no radio play. So he said there's no reason why you should ever think that you could be on a major label and still be as potent as you are without being on a major.
Hmm. Interesting conversation. I would agree with a lot of it, but not all of it. And of course, we're talking, 1994.
Yes, that's correct.
I'm sure a few years later, a major label would be much more possible. And there are strategies to getting around it, but you would have to probably change your sound a bit. And you would also have to do things like make sure that each album had at least a couple radio friendly songs without any overt sexuality or swearing. And, there's lots of cover art you can do that's provocative without being quote unquote obscene. But, it's hard to kind of put myself back into those days. I mean, I think his position as president of a major company would be probably considerably more conservative in an economic business sense than mine would be. I would think, regardless of whether you are on Lookout or on a major label, there would have needed to be some changes made in order to reach a mass audience. And that's a question that each band has to look into their own heart and answer. Do I want or am I willing to do this? What is most important to me, to express myself or to reach a lot of people?
Yeah.
And most bands usually end up coming down somewhere in the middle.
And another reason too that we stayed where we were kind of was financial. Honestly, we had long talks about, well, if we're going to expand from a 3-piece into a 4-piece and add a guitar to toughen up our guitar sound, as you said, it's going to have a substantial financial impact on being able to tour, all the things that go around along with it. Now we're feeding somebody else. I think at that point we were just barely getting by to be able, and it was like a lot of touring, as you know, we're almost at 1,000 shows. It was a real tough decision for us but we said we really needed to have that extra guitar. So eventually we did get there, but we didn't do it for at least 5 records.
In order to make as much money as you were making at Lookout, you would have to sell a lot more records on a major label.
Oh, heck yeah. Oh, Lookout gave us,
even you'd have to probably sell 50,000 or so.
I mean, as you know, because you gave us this deal, but I don't know how many artists who are watching this would know. Lookout gave us ownership of everything. We own everything, and Lookout only took it. It was like what would you call a P&D deal, like
It's almost like that, yeah.
Pansy and Division deal. No, I'm kidding.
We split 50-50. That was yes. I think that's what it was.
It
No,
might have
if you're
been
talking
60
about the
40.
profit share, it was
60
60
40. Yeah.
40
Yeah.
60 40.
in favor of the band.
Lookout was for me because I'd never heard of a band being able to keep their publishing or keep, it was always like bands have to give something up.
Oh,
We get
it
no,
happens, but it usually only happens to well-established bands or
right.
bands extremely in demand.
So for
And
me, I mean, because I was shocked from the beginning. I mean, for me, by the time I met John, the wheels were already going. I was just sort of like, I need you, get. And so like the whole thing just sort of blew up in a way like, are we, wait, we're keeping our masters. We're sharing profit. I mean, and we can be out, and we're of this age. It was like the social science experiment that had just gone awry. I mean, I couldn't believe how lucky we got as a band being on Lookout.
well,
Honestly,
it fit in with my idea how things should work. The one thing that I was adamant about was that if we invested in you a generic band, any band at the beginning, and took a chance on you, and that you had a right to all your own material and everything, but as long as we held up our end, we had a right to keep releasing it
correct,
indefinitely. Not
correct.
all bands agreed with that. Some bands think, "Oh, we're big now; we want to take it back," and sell it to another company. To me, that's a form of treason. But
Yeah. That's betrayal.
That is betrayal.
as far as owning your own songs, well, you wrote them. Many bands with the publishing, they do a deal with the record label where the record label handles it for them, and so they take a cut of it. But there's no reason that the record company should own the publishing, as happened a lot in the early days of rock and roll, because that's where most of the money is.
Yeah.
We had different types of deals with different bands, but all of them were basically on the same premise, that we were doing this as a cooperative effort. You have certain things that you can do, and I have certain things I can do as a label, and we work together. And if there are any profits, we share them. We split them 60-40. And to me, that was a ideal way to run. And sad to say, as long as I was there, it did work. Once I was not there anymore, it didn't work for reasons that we could do another broadcast
You've got
about.
a book. You've got a whole book about that.
I unfortunately had somewhat of a personal breakdown, which left me unable to continue in that position. And I take a lot of the blame from not dealing with it in a better way. But the thing is, if I had been able to stay there and stick with it, it would still be working today for a lot of bands. I think it's an excellent model to run not just the music business, but any artistic enterprise on, a cooperative, like we each do what we can and we take a share of it. But that
Well,
was,
one of the things that I put in our one-page contract was that Lookout can sell our records in perpetuity as long as they keep them in print and pay us royalties.
yeah, well, I wrote that into all the Lookout contracts too.
Yeah.
Well, Larry, by the way, if
Thank
I
you.
just want to thank you. Yes, thank you for having that vision and sharing that vision with John and seeing what he was trying to do. I mean, for me, it was a big whirlwind. It was only a year. I'd been struggling for a decade before that, trying to get something going, and to jump into this and have it go so quickly and just be. It was certainly a ride. And
Well, a lot of life is about getting ready, and
yes,
being a fair bit older than you, most of my life had been a fiasco up until the time that Lookout suddenly all came together in the space of a year or so too.
yeah,
But you had
yeah,
also honed your abilities to identify things
yes.
over years that you couldn't have just
Uh,
said, oh, I'm going to start a label and then have it be
yeah,
successful.
well, yeah, but if you would have asked my parents, they would have said, "I don't know what's ever going to become of that guy. All he does is spend all his time hanging around rock and roll shows."
Kids, take this advice. All right, Larry, thank you so much for your
Thank you so
time.
much. It's great
Really
to talk to you.
appreciate it.
Well, I'm very honored to be a part of this and to be part of the Pansy Division legacy, which I expect will continue to live on. This is one of my ongoing heartbreaks with Pansy Division, is that we were never able to sort of break through to the mainstream gay scene. I'm still hoping you guys are going to come up with a bona fide mega hit record. It's not out of the question. Just because you're a little bit farther along in life doesn't mean it can't happen. Thanks for including me, and again, once again, in this. This has been a wonderful chance to reminisce and catch up with current times as well.
Thanks again.
Larry.
All right,
Okay.
bye bye now.
Bye.